Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen and everyone in between. Another special episode of Author Talks, and this time a special preview. The first 10 minutes or so, read by me, of the next entry in my Cluster Cycle series, Lost Station Circé. File 1. The Junk in the Junk. My poor unhappy man, whither are you going over this mountain top, alone and without knowing the way? Homer. The drive core of the Benbow had been misfiring for the best part of 3 days before its spectacular, yet safe, failure. As he slowly clambered up the starboard coupling to check on a few of the feed lines, Farah felt the support line cutting into his chest. Taking a hand off the rungs of the maintenance ladder, he adjusted the support harness and returned to his climb. The hiss of static through his small earpiece heralded his equi-partner Sudu. Sudu, the green-skinned, lovable bastard, was speaking from his safe perch on a maintenance catwalk 30 feet below. "Hoi, Farah, what's happening? You stopped. See something?" "No, I didn't. Bloody line trying to stifle me." "Oh, well hurry up. Captain's waiting for a report." That informal speech, so unlike other equi even today. "We've been out of warp for 12 minutes, and that's 12 minutes too long for him." "All right, keep your scales on." Farah increased his speed, almost jumping from rung to rung, his joints and muscles starting to scream from the effort. Memories pushed through his tired mind. The demands of Captain Sollet for increased anything and everything on this ramshackle piece of junk he called a ship. That one time his harness belt snapped in a key place and wrapped round his neck as he struggled to hold onto a rusted piece of the drive core shielding, almost throttling him until Sudu came to the rescue. It had long ceased to annoy or sting him that he was always chosen for these kinds of repairs, whether it was crawling through ducts to check on bypass circuitry, descending into the waste processing plant when something went wrong and the canteen food tasted like real waste instead of a good imitation, or warm engine problems like now, it was the same. Captain Sollet would make a face like a wrinkled fruit and say, "Send Farah." No more or less qualified than anyone else on the ship, but he was a human raised from childhood, the lowest in their social structure. All the dirty and dangerous jobs were his to do. They send me here, they send me there, they send me every bloody where. Farah smiled at the unintentional rhythm of his words. He wasn't a natural poet, or singer, or anything like that. He hadn't been given the chance. All his more erudite leanings he had at second or third hand, from passing traders and employers, or the tongue-in-cheek wording of a contract. His adopted mother also spoke to him sometimes in an old-fashioned way, using strange paraphrases and quotations. She'd often said he would know about such things someday. But would he? Did it even matter? He finally reached the place where the emergency warning beacon had triggered, and saw the problem. A fused secondary plasma conductor. These old black engine models were all the same. If even the tiniest auxiliary line failed, the whole engine would shut down. It wasn't fun to drop out of warp with barely 10 seconds warning, with momentum taking hold and the gravity field struggling to catch up. He had been coming out of a shower when the ship slowed and he was thrown into the opposite wall. He spoke into his earpiece. "I'm here, Sudu. I found the trouble. Switch on the lighting matrix for D12 coupling section. Starboard side." He slipped on his shaded goggles just in time, as the whole area was flooded with a harsh white light. Securing his harness to the surrounding rigging, he searched his satchel and got out the tools he needed. For a simple plasma conductor repair this close to port, all that was needed was a reroute using some of the surrounding spares. It wouldn't stand a sustained trip, but a short warp hop to Cape Sistinea wouldn't strain it too much. It took the best part of half an hour to isolate and decouple the ruined conductor. Whatever the nature of its failure, it had been spectacular, fusing the nearest brackets and power cut-offs. He needed to shuffle along, repositioning his anchor points, and cut off the power at earlier sections either way. Solid would be annoyed at the delay, but he'd just have to lump it. But for all the grumbling, it was curious what might have caused the failure. Probably some kind of energy build-up. It was a mere mutter as he activated the final cutoff and positioned himself one last time. Aura not developing, or perhaps a few of the plasma streams fused when critical. If they did... He glanced up at the large warp drive. Good thing it didn't blow itself up. With the section powered down, he opened the 6 auxiliary hatchways on either side of the fuse coupling and drew out the secondary wires. The warmth of the pulsing plasma wiring hummed through his gloves, and as he connected them, was careful about any feedback. Plasma feedback wasn't like the old records of electric shocks on ancient Earth. One bit of plasma on his wrist would take his hand off, and leave him screaming in agony for a week from the poisonous aftershocks. The secondary conductors were all in place, and after flicking the standby switches for each, he reconnected that section. The auxiliary conductors glowed, and the section's electronics hummed and purred in satisfaction. All was well, for the moment. He signalled down to Sudu. All fixed. Conductor burnt out. We'll need to fix it up at Cape Sistinea. Okay, I'll note that. Also, make sure it's a full half-length. The damage spread out a bit. Understood. You best come down now. Solet's probably panting to get going again, and we don't want to be in here when the warp drive activates. Farah rappelled down in record time. Both Farah and Sudu knew the old saying about someone caught up in a warp field. Seen today on the ship, seen tomorrow on 7 different planets. A ship's mass and control mechanism kept the warp bubble in check, but a human body could still be torn apart and thrown out in an unknown location by the warp discharge, whether to a point some distance off or into an adjoining room. They were out and behind the twin doors separating the engineering platform from the warp drive a good 10 minutes before the warp field started up again and the ship charted its course. A voice blared over the intercom. Farah to report to the bridge immediately. I repeat, Farah to report to the bridge. Farah sighed and left Sudu to perform the final adjustments to the warp controls so the auxiliary connectors would hold out until Cape Sistinea. Leaning against the walls of the old-fashioned lift as it rose and then shuttled along with the grating of old runners and power feeds, he prepped himself for the usual mixture of thanks and criticism which was Solet's standard greeting. Stepping onto the bridge, he noted for the 1000th time the worn metalwork, the gungy console interfaces, the pretentious captain's chair in which Solet sat with an upright posture directly mirroring his twisted morals. It looked like a perverted ancient Earth fantasy. Not surprising, it was built by humans, bought by the captain for a song when it was about to be scrapped as a useless and outmoded relic, and continually refitted and held together since then. Solet twisted round, glaring at the human. Well? The connector burnt out. It took the adjoining sections with it. I've rerouted, but we'll need to replace it as soon as we get to Cape Sistinea. At least we have warp now. Solet turned back to his controls. And we can make it. We'll be arriving in less than 15 minutes. Are you all right? A deep-toned voice came from across the bridge. Farah turned. A Fellas, perhaps 20 years older than himself, tall and graceful with locks over her short mane worked into a dozen dreadlocks. This was his adopted mother. I'm fine. I didn't get burnt or anything. I keep telling the captain we need an official repair officer. Solet grimaced, his voice irritated. They don't come cheap. An operation like ours doesn't have much slack for luxuries. If you consider essential safety a luxury, I suppose so. Officer Lenore, if you don't like it, you and your precious son can get off at Cape Sistinea and find somewhere else. Lenore didn't respond to this. Farah and she shared the same thought. She knew that Solet was the only captain who had been willing to take them in after... Farah flexed his shoulders, feeling the slightest rip along the seam of his shirt. It was getting too small for his muscular frame. Better find something at the second-hand markets when they docked. Assuming he had the money. Welfare there may have been in the capital sector, but here in the outer sector it was less than useless. Without cash, you either indentured yourself, got a job, or starved. Solet caught his eye and snorted. Don't worry, you'll get your shore pay, but don't think it'll be any extra just because you did a little rerouting. I'd like to see you rerouting a plasma connector on short notice, was Farah's thought as he suppressed a glare. I hope you enjoyed this sample. Lost Station Circé will be available from July 30th, 2024 on ebook and hardback, in ebook and hardback, I apologise, and will be available through Amazon, bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble and Kobo, among others. Basically anywhere that sells books, you should be able to find it. Thank you for listening and see ya! But wait, there's more. There are the bloopers. All the dirty and dangerous jots. Blah, blah. She'd often said he would know what such things were. Blah. She'd often said he would know what such thing. Blah. He spoke into his blah. It wouldn't stand a sustained trip, but a short warp hop to Cape Sinis. It wouldn't stand a sustained trip, but a short warp hop to Cape Sistinea would. Blah, blah. Yeah, apologies for any sound weirdness you might hear during the recording. It's summer. I'm still getting used to this whole creating audio stuff. Yeah, it's not going to be the best, probably. Hey ho. Leaning against the wall of an old. Blah, 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 blah. Leaning against the walls of an. Leaning against the wall of the old-fashioned lift as it rose, then stuttered. Bleh. Leaning against the walls of the old-fashioned lift as it rose and then. A deep-toned female voice came from across the bridge. Farah turned. A fella, perhaps 20 years older than himself, tall and graceful with locks of her short mane worked into a dozen dreadlocks. Need to redo that bit. Welfare there may have been